Good afternoon and welcome to the Founders Corner. We're here today with Jeremy Weisz from Rise25. Rise25, what's that all about?
You know, it's actually interesting, Mike. So always and you've heard the adage of like rising tides lift all boats. And I always believe just in relationships. I always try and give first, and just that's kind of the adage of our company. We always want to give first. And the 25 was like one of our clients said, you know, Jeremy, I feel like with your team and you, I have 25 hours in the day. I have an extra hour. You guys kind of give that to me. And so at the time, actually, it's funny, Mike, when we first started the company, we didn't have a name for like a year. We just did our thing, helping people launch and run podcasts. And we didn't have a name. We just were doing our thing. And we're like, we should probably have a name at some point. And rise.com was taken. And so when someone said the 25 part, I'm like, perfect. It's much easier to get a domain with a number in it. So we're going with Rise25.
And how long have you guys been around?
So John and I, my business partner, John Corcoran, we've been separately doing podcasting and helping since 2009. And we came together around 7 years ago. We met randomly at in your neck of the woods, old neck of the woods in San Francisco,
Okay.
at a conference.
And I noticed on your screen that you have a doctor in your title, and if I recall, I think you were a chiropractor. Is that correct? Or
Yes.
continue to be a chiropractor?
So by trade, my background's in biochemistry and as a chiropractor, which has nothing to do with what I do now necessarily, but okay. I started on the journey because, actually in college, I wanted to be a chiropractor. My dad suffered with really bad neck pain when I was growing up, and doctors told him you just have to live with it. And the only thing that helped him was actually a chiropractor. And I kind of saw him go through that transformation. And I'm like, I always like helping people and kind of have that sense of, healing in a natural way. And so that's what I ended up doing.
And then you transitioned to the podcast. What got you into podcasts initially?
Yeah, and the same, it was while I was still practicing. I when you run a small business like a chiropractic office, you pretty much, as you probably know, you have to do everything. You have to be the janitor, you have to do the marketing, you have to treat the patient. So I always love the marketing aspect of it. And so I would go to conferences, and the conferences had nothing to do with chiropractic. They were, I think, digital marketing conferences. And so I was meeting all these digital marketing people on the cutting edge of this stuff. And so this was, again, back in 2007, 2008. And I found this medium, which most people were not talking about podcasts at the time. And I was like, I love talking to people. I love finding out the story. I'm so curious, and it just hooked me. So there's like kind of a business reason and a personal reason. The business reason, obviously, I just love the forming of relationships. As you run a podcast, you get to talk to really interesting people. You get to tell their story. You get to form relationships with them. And we do business with our friends, and we do business with other relationships. So like, I chat with Mike, seems like a great guy. Whenever I think of, people in e-commerce or need marketing help or whatever it is, I'm like, I need to refer them to Mike. And so, but the personal reason was actually, so I think there's a deeper reason for me, which is it helps people leave a legacy, helps my guests leave a legacy too. So so my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and he's not alive anymore, but the Holocaust Foundation did a interview with him and told his story of the things that happened. And him and his brother were in Poland, and they were the only people of their family to survive and come out of the concentration camps. But his story lives on because they did an interview with him. And on Inspired Insider, on my About page, I put clips of the interview. It's graphic, I have to warn you, and then I put the whole interview on the page as well. And it's something that my kids will watch, my grandkids will watch, my great grandkids will hopefully watch, and it really left a legacy. So when I go into this medium, I'm always thinking, this is going to live on, right? You're going to put this on YouTube. It's probably going to go on a website and it will live on. And so if it can inspire one person to do something, then so be it.
And what do you think is the major difference between sort of the audio only format versus, a YouTube video? And why is the consumption different?
That's a great question, actually, because I get that a lot. It's like, Jeremy, do I really need to do the video part? Because podcasting is stereo, I mean, historically, it's just the audio, and most people just do the audio. But I always say this, even if you're doing just the audio, like we're doing here, turn on your camera and just chat with them, even if it's the audio, because you have more of a personal connection. Now, I always see, you might as well produce the video as well, because there's two reasons. One, it's just more personal, and when it's more personal, people can see you, they could see me when they're looking at it, and you just gain a different affinity for someone when you're watching them and looking at them. And the other thing is, people consume in different mediums, right? Like sometimes people only consume in YouTube. People only consume on iTunes or Spotify. So you want to be everywhere. As long as you're producing the content, you want to be everywhere that you can be, because people just naturally, sometimes people, even though I have the video, the audio, the podcast, and all these channels, sometimes people go to my site and just read the blog post, because that's just how they consume content. The other piece is, it's great for Google, because obviously Google owns YouTube, and it's great for SEO. So it gets indexed in SEO. So I've had people where I've, produced, when you look up their name, I'm 3 search results on the first page of Google for them. And one of them is the YouTube video, because it's ranking for their name for the SEO.
One of the interesting things for me has been, the audio only, is interesting, but I remember for the longest time, there was a DJ out in the Bay Area, and her name was Sterling James. And she was sort of like the late night jazz kind of voice.
It's a great name.
Yeah, but she had this really smooth jazz kind of voice. And I got to meet Sterling, and it was a little bit different than what I had expected, but it was like I had created a persona based solely on her voice, right? And when I met her in person, she was a lovely lady. I'm sure she'll never hear this, but she was a lovely lady. But she just wasn't what I was expecting, because I had created something in my head. And you can, I think with the audio only, it does allow you to use your imagination more, especially if it's about storytelling or things like that. When you and I chat like this, pretty much you're getting what you get, what we are and that kind of thing. So there is kind of a little bit of a magic to the audio. That's why I think radio was so powerful for so long, right? Because it's like reading a book. You got to create the characters, you got to build all that.
Yeah, I mean, the other side of things, is that you don't have to worry about what you're wearing, what your hair looks like, or all of that, or what your background looks like. You just kind of flip it on, and sometimes that makes people feel comfortable that they know that they're not, the video is not being recorded. But I think it is more personal to release it out there, and you do get a sense of someone with it.
And what do you think is, so let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of podcasting and whatnot. What's usually the biggest barrier for most people when it comes to starting a podcast?
Yeah, there's a few barriers. I mean, the technology tends to hold people back. Some of the things that shouldn't hold people back, hold people back, right? So technology, okay? It's very simple. In my opinion, I keep it very simple. You really just need a USB mic and Zoom, or whatever technology is whenever someone's watching this. I use Skype with eCam call recorder back in the day, and then Zoom is just so easy. We're already meeting on Zoom. There's so many different ways to record. Anywhere you meet with someone, there's a way to record it. So there's really no excuse. And people ask me all the time with technology stuff, and I'm like, this is a $70 microphone, ATR 2100. I have another Blue Yeti, which is, so you could be all in like for, $70 to $120, really. That's one thing that holds people back. The other is, it's, what do I talk about? What do I do for the podcast, right? And so like they kind of get overwhelmed. And when I say with a podcast, there's 5 different types of pieces of content you can produce. I bucket them into 5 different buckets. One is thought leadership. Okay, so that person's internal thought leadership, and that could be, anyone. There's kind of 7 categories I think of when it comes to thought leadership, but one of them is, what questions do you get a lot of? So I tell people to use a podcast to save you time, right? So if you find yourself answering the same question over, like we're talking about here, I did an episode about some of these pieces because people ask me, what should I use to start, like technology wise? I'm like, okay, I answer this question a lot. So you could produce an episode, a really thorough one that you could send to people to save you time. Another one is obviously a background story of you or your expertise. And so there's a lot of different, so thought leadership will be one. And sometimes people skew far in one direction or the other. The second would be strategic partners and referral partners, right? So other people, thought leaders in the industry that you want to chat with and network with. And so when you think of your, whatever industry you're in, strategic partners and thought leaders in that industry, and people who you refer business to them. It's probably people you already refer to as a company, like we were talking, if you're in the cannabis space, well, who are the people you refer to in the cannabis space? What is the software people are using? What are some of the people in the industry? And then the third is potential clients, like someone thinking of working with you. Someone introduced me to someone the other week for a podcast, and I was like, this person's a rock star. I go, let's forget about let's not have a conversation about you starting a podcast. Let's just come on my show and I'll interview you and we'll get to know each other better. It's like kind of like dating, right? And so I just kind of said, don't worry about, let's just forego that conversation for now. Let's get to know each other better. And it was an avenue I can profile them. And so it could be a potential client or a current client, right? So, or past client where they're, you're just interviewing them on their story, but they're going to say, oh my God, Mike is the best thing since, they'll just mention Mike is the best thing since sliced bread. He did X, Y, Z, and it'll come up naturally in the conversation. And the fifth is different, like top level, like maybe speakers, authors, authorities in the space. And it could be like a big speaker, author in the industry. And that provides a lot of social proof in the industry, obviously, for that. So some people, Mike, as you probably know, skew, maybe they only do thought leadership. So they're only talking about their industry thought leadership. And then maybe they skew just to getting the famous speakers and authors. But there's a combination of all of them. So to answer your question, it kind of it holds them back by like, what do I do? What content do I produce? And the technology. Those are the 2 biggest things. And sometimes surprisingly, a name. They have all those things. They have the technology, they have the content, and they're like, I don't have a name of my podcast. And that little thing will hold someone back from, and when I started my podcast, Inspired Insider, I didn't have a name for 6 months. I was like, I'm not sure what to call this thing. I just went on. I'm like, welcome to the podcast, everyone. This is Jeremy Weisz here. And I had the domain jeremyweisz.com. And I didn't even have a name. I was just like, I just wanted to get started. Now, not everyone's like me. They want to have it all kind of figure it out. But I just got started.
Yeah, I know, like for us, the biggest challenge is, we can produce content, but really the production aspect of it. And that's why we look to, you guys for production, because, we'd like a nice intro. We'd like you to take out half of the stop words that we use, that sound horrible. And then also to just sort of clean it up and package it and then, distribute it, right? Because there's 40, 50 platforms that I could potentially be on, and I don't know how to get to all of them. So that's why we would turn to Rise25. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the production that you guys.
That's a good point. I forgot to mention that. But it does hold. It does hold people. I mean, those are the first initial things I mentioned, which will hold people back. And then once they get into it, they realize there's a lot of moving pieces in it. And so then that will stop people. They may start it and be like, okay, and they may just stop doing it because of that. But yeah, the production you want, in my opinion, as a business owner, and we deal mostly with B2B businesses, you should be running your business, building your business, and building relationships. And that's our philosophy. And then we want to take everything off of someone's plate. So it should be we say we're an easy button for someone to launch and run their podcast. Now, the key is to really have the strategy in place. As you know, like, you help people put a strategy in place. A strategy is what makes it profitable and creates ROI, and you're gonna get a lot out of it. But to keep doing it, the other piece of it is the production piece. So our process is very simple. You upload the file to a Google Drive folder, and then we do everything else. So there are a lot of pieces that you want to think about in the production, because it's not just distribution across the podcast channels. So obviously, the audio, and if you're doing the video, but John Corcoran, my business partner, he was a speechwriter at the White House under Bill Clinton. So he kind of like looks after and sees the content teams. We have writers, editors, because you want to have a nice, rich blog post as well that goes along with it, because you want to drive people to your website, because people who drive people listeners only to iTunes or Spotify or Stitcher, you don't capture any data, right? And there's no other really data about your company. So I encourage people, if you do have it, you want to make sure there is an asset that lives on your website. So there's a lot of different moving pieces. And as a business owner, you want to make sure that you're really just building the relationship and running your business.
Yeah, I mean, we tell our clients sort of a similar message about, not building on rented land. Don't rely on a single platform, because you can get kicked off of Facebook, you can get kicked off of LinkedIn. I'm assuming you can get kicked off of iTunes. You may not have done anything that you're even aware of, but for some reason that tripped their terms of service. And so you want to make sure you have that degree of control. You can be on all those platforms, but you need to be on your own platform.
You're 100% right. I mean, it happened a couple of weeks ago. For some reason, one of the clients feed podcasts stopped showing up on Spotify, just for no reason. And we contacted them like, oh yeah, there was a glitch and it just dropped the feed. And it didn't matter, because they were on all the other platforms. Plus they were sending people to their website, which has an audio player there. So it really didn't matter. It didn't, like, there was no even blip on the radar, but we discovered it. And then we messaged them like, oh yeah, you need to resubmit and blah, blah, blah. And they, it was fine. We resubmitted it, but it was just a mistake, a glitch on there, and it just dropped the feed for whatever reason. So, but you're right. If someone was solely on a platform, people would go crazy thinking, oh my God, the world is ending.
And how much of, like, the celebrity podcast, how has that boosted the podcast industry? I mean, there's been a whole bunch of information about Joe Rogan lately and those types. Has that helped the podcast industry? Has it given it credibility, or does that undermine it?
No, 100%. Yeah, 100%. It legitimizes it when people are seeing big names that they follow and that they have a podcast, and also large companies, like Amazon or Spotify, making lots of acquisitions. And we're seeing a lot of acquisitions of different shows as well. And it's just becoming more mainstream. I think someone actually sent me over here, sitting to my right, someone sent me like a 4-page, I can't remember if it was the New York Times, but they mailed me like, Jimmy, you got to see this. It's all 4 pages are on podcasting. So it's becoming mainstream, and it's coming to the forefront of people's minds, and not just as a consumer listener, but as a creator. So people are like, oh, I can actually have my own show, and I could have my own platform. So it's definitely no doubt helped the industry.
And so on your platform, I mean, on your podcast, what do you chat about? What are your subject matters?
So it's, my subject matters will shift depending on my interests and what I'm looking to do. So I may, for instance, I had someone reach out to me, and this person was coming out with a book the PR company is like, oh, I have this great guest for you, Jeremy. And his name was Yuri Adoni, and he has a book coming out, and he was a VC in Israel. And I'm like, oh, well, this guy sounds really interesting. So I had him on, and then I was like, wow, this is fast. And you know this, Mike, is, in the VC world, I didn't at all. So I interviewed him, like, this is fascinating. I want to interview more of the venture capitalists. They have their hand in so many different companies, and I wanted to get inside their mind of why they invest and why they don't invest. And so this led me down this
You'll be
path.
disappointed when you find out.
I loved it. And so I said, Yuri, who else should I have on who is in the VC world? You're in the VC world. And he immediately introduced me to a bunch of people. And so I went down this venture capitalist route. So it could depend on just what I find interesting. I could stumble upon it, or it could be like, oh, I, as an agency, love learning about agencies. So I will have top agencies on and learn from some of the best in the world. So it will depend. Right now it's more kind of venture capital, top agencies, but I've had the founders of P90X, Atari, Einstein Bagels, Orlando Magic on, because I find the stories fascinating. So it kind of, whatever strikes your fancy, and same things with you, right? Whatever tends to strike your fancy that month, you can go deep into that topic.
What I've found is, a great guest, I'll throw out a topic and they'll just go with it. They'll run with it. However, recently I had a guest where I would ask them something and they'd give me like a yes or no response. I was like, oh, you're just killing me. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with a guest that, the guest was not being difficult. It was their personality.
Yeah.
So how do you, help the guest sort of open up and, because otherwise it's just not all that compelling.
That is a great question. And so it kind of goes back to the root sometimes for people. And sometimes I know people for their podcast, they'll only have people on that they can listen to them. They've been on another podcast. They have they're on YouTube doing a speech or talk or something like that. And so they can hear them and they can go, okay, this would be a good guest. And they won't have people on who they don't have some kind of clip of them speaking, because they're worried about that. They're worried about having someone on that was just going to go,
right? Yes,
Mike. Yep. And then you're like, oh, I don't even know where to take this.
Yeah.
So let's say you didn't know that, and the person shows up on the show. A little research goes a long way a lot of times. And so one, I have some questions that I have go-to questions. I don't script it like you. I kind of just keep it free flowing, but I do have a bank of questions I ask that I have that tend to produce some kind of good story. Okay. So if, let's say, there's a lull in the conversation, I can kind of like throw a dart at one of these things and anywhere in the conversation and ask it. Okay. And I also may have their LinkedIn page up to see, is there anything interesting there? Like there was one I had the other day. This person was a pastor for 17 years and now is in digital marketing. I'm like, tell me the story. Yeah. And sometimes just by saying, tell me the story of how you went from here to here, they have to tell a story because it's some kind of journey. So they can't give a yes or no. I'll give you an example of one of the questions I throw, like if I throw a dart at it, and typically I will have in front of me, so in case I need to reference it, but one would maybe like, tell me like a big challenge you had in your career, or it could be, tell me a big milestone that you were really proud of in your career. And it depends obviously what career they're in and what they do. Sometimes it's just taking one point in their journey and another point in their journey. And I will ask, how'd you get from here to here? And it makes them, they can't say, yep. So it makes them tell a story, but there's definite ways to, and I find if you direct them to a certain specific point in time, it allows them to visualize it. So it kind of goes into research. Whereas if you have kind of whether they're about page or LinkedIn page up, and you could say, why did you get your the other day, I also had someone, they did computer science for 5 years, and then they were an agency owner. I'm like, why did you do computer science? And they went into this whole story. So those are some tips I use to kind of talk about the art and science of getting content, like drawing content out of people.
So tell us a little bit about the benefits of hiring Rise25 as opposed to doing it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's with anything. If you hire someone or a team or a company that's been doing something for over a decade, you shortcut things, right? So people will say, well, if are you trying to save time or money? And the realization is, if you could shortcut the time and produce something that's going to create ROI and get someone's or a company's decade of experience, I do that all day long. Like, I want to stick into my lane personally. Like, if there's Facebook ads or YouTube ads, I am not an expert at any of that. I want to gain their expertise and not spend the time and extra money, I wasted money if I tried to do it myself. So I am a big proponent of mentorship and hiring the experts. And so if you actually, we help people put a strategy in place so it makes sense for their business. It's not just hitting record and putting it up online. It's actually, creating that foundation of making sure it creates ROI for the business. And then the second piece is really getting all of the minutia and details off of your plate or your team's plate so they can focus on building the relationships and running the business, which is really what they're for. So I'm always a big proponent of hiring outside experts this is what they do and this is all they do.
Yeah, I would agree. We tend to tell our folks, why did you launch your business? And they'll go into why. And very rarely do they tell us because they wanted to do digital marketing or because they wanted to figure out, how to rank on, Google. That's not why they launched their business. So for us, what we try to do is let them go back to the reasons why they launched their business and let us worry about the details. Let us figure all that other stuff out so that you can focus on that. Plus, as a rule, it tends to be just a better use of their time. The experience and the time that you guys have put into understanding podcasting and learning podcast, it's going to take me, it may not take me as long because things have moved along considerably from when you started, but it's still going to take me a long time. And in the meantime, I'm not working on my business. I'm not working and focusing on growing my business. I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I get launched on Spotify? Right? That's probably not the best use of my time.
I'm a big proponent always in all parts of my life, Mike, is doing the same thing that I preach. Even if it, by the way, even if it's something that I can do, like I can, probably fix something around my house that my wife wants me to fix. Do I want to do it? And should I be doing it? So I'd rather, if I can, have someone else do it who's more of an expert than I am.
Yeah, my favorite story around that is the plumber that comes out and the woman hires the plumber because her water heater is not working. Right? And then he goes downstairs, he tinkles with it for 5 or 6 minutes, hits it with the back of his wrench, and it's up and running. And he gives her a bill for $100, and she's like, "Oh my God, you're charging me $100 for 5 minutes work." And he's like, "No, I'm charging you $100 for 10 years worth of knowledge."
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Totally.
So where can people learn more if they want to learn more about Rise25?
Yeah, you can go to rise25.com. We have John and I are bantering like an old married couple on a video on the homepage. You can watch it. We talk about how do you get ROI with the podcast. You can go to inspiredinsider.com and check out some episodes there of great people as well.
And the other thing I can say about you guys is you guys send out newsletters and emails with helpful tips on a regular basis, which I've actually started to read, surprisingly
Awesome.
enough. Yeah, I have. So I know that you support the folks that are working with you and provide them, helpful benefit tips and things like that on how to produce the content and stuff like that.
We have so much like free content people can consume to learn more on our podcast. So I encourage people to go there and learn, even if you're thought about starting a podcast, we share a lot of our thoughts and methodologies on the podcast.
Well, we very much appreciate you spending some time with us. Definitely check out rise25.com and all of their free tips. And if you're thinking about a podcast and you're not sure where to get started, Jeremy will more than be willing to help you out there. Again, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for being in the Founders Corner, and we look forward to visiting you again.
Thanks, everyone.